Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and actually get to share with you a resource that I hope you will take advantage of checking out and actually using. I have a tendency to try and create what I call tip sheets, and this one you will be able to find on my website. So if you might actually have gotten this if you are getting some emails, you already downloaded it. And so this video is uh, a like a just a special edition to this resource. So I want to go through um, what we have here and unpack a few of these for you. And I hope that this will be helpful in just thinking about how we can have more courageous dialogue. It's so often that many of us get into conversations and we think we are having a discussion and it starts to move into a place of debate. So in this one of this boxes up here, one of my favorite boxes to actually talk about first is how if we are in a situation where we're trying to convince people of things, where we're trying to win, then that is an appropriate space to use the skills of debate. If, however, we are actually trying to create a shared purpose where we are looking to serve or to learn, then we actually need to use the skills of dialogue. And that in the middle is this idea of discussion. So that's where you're sort of in that place of sharing. That might be how you're sharing your story and somebody else is sharing their story. And there really isn't a way in which you're trying to share that story to win, bring someone over to your side. And it's also not necessarily where you're trying to help serve a particular population or help someone in their journey of wellness, for example, which is something that would be near and dear to me. But the key in this little box is this statement up here is that dialogue is where the process of healing begins. And one of the things that we need to be much more cautious of is that dialogue is not always the easiest thing to do. It actually takes a lot of courage, and that so many of us have been taught how to listen to people in a way in which all we're doing is listening to respond. We're listening for when that person stops so then we can say whatever we want to say. And we're not actually listening to understand, to support that person, to just like actually just listen to them. And so this other box here is that we really need to start thinking about how can we listen and believe a person. So I shared with you one of my favorite quotes that comes from a book by John Blank. And his book is called More Than I Could Imagine. And one of the things he talks about in there is that, he went through this process of thinking, okay, he's a journalist. I am going to, get all the facts. And when people read the facts and understand what the situation is, they're going to make the right decisions. And I think he, along with many others, and what I've also learned in all of my work, is that facts is not what actually changes people. If you think about for yourself, anything that you've done that's been a major change, it is the stories. I'm currently talking with people about how they're changing their diets. And, we all know we all know that sugar is bad for us, right? We all know that we need to not be having that ice cream every single night after dinner. But that doesn't mean that that's what we do. I mean, all of the data tells us these things, especially if you are like me and you have family members who have diabetes. Um, it's not the facts, it's stories. It's going to be the stories. And that is where you can start to have some movement and some change, is being able to tell stories in which that person feels heard and connected, and we connect across stories. So just want to mention that one of the first things is that we need to listen and believe, and that this little chart, this diagram here is so helpful in thinking about the purpose of the skills when we are, either needing to debate so that we can clarify what our differences are, or we're using the skill of dialogue in order to actually learn and serve others better. In some of the other work I've done in the time that we're here, this next box, so we were kind of, doing a little bit of a process of going through the boxes, is that practicing pausing is one of the ways that we can help regulate our nervous systems. And why this might be important is that without our knowing it, our bodies will start to move into a space of protection. And our bodies don't know if what they're protecting us against is actually like that saber-tooth tiger or someone saying something that has triggered a feeling of being attacked. And so one of the first things that I try to help people do in most of my work, especially when I give keynotes, is to actually just invite everybody to take a deep breath, hold it, and then slowly let it out. So if we learn how to pause and do a little box breathing, it gives you the ability in those moments to then be able to ask the question of yourself and maybe to the other person, what is really needed right now? Do you need someone to hear you? Do you need a solution? Are you looking for advice? Oftentimes, when we pause and then we regulate ourselves, we're in a position where we're better able to find out what does that person need and also what do you need. So that is a tip so that you can have those courageous conversations. We can have the courageous dialogue that actually will then help us lead to some kind of healing. The other strategy that I have here in this tip sheet is that it is often important that we find a way to actually acknowledge the divides that we see or that we're experiencing. So it doesn't help to tell someone, "Oh, we're not divided," or "Your lived experience," oh, "Oh, we all can get along," or "This is all," like it's not helpful to try and ignore the ways in which people feel divided. And one of the things that's really clear right now is that all of us are, if I could use this word, sort of a victim of our algorithms. It'll be interesting to find out. Please, make a comment in the sections here on how you even found this. How did you find this video? Because so often the algorithms really determine what we get to see. So first off, we need to, when we're having a courageous dialogue, we need to acknowledge that there is a sense of division, and oftentimes we are all really divided. We're getting very different information, or even that there are ways in which our communities are literally divided by, maybe a highway or the schools that we end up being able to go to. The next strategy that I wanted to highlight with that is one, acknowledge the divide. The second is then to ask permission when you're in this conversation, when you're in this dialogue, to share your perspective. So if you realize, for example, that you're talking to maybe a neighbor, and you hear something from them that suggests that they see something very different than you do, it is often helpful before you tell your story to ask permission if they are interested in hearing your perspective. Is that I kind of have a different perspective. Would you be interested in hearing my perspective? And I say that because sometimes it's not the right time to hear the perspective. Maybe they need, there's an opportunity to say, not hear the perspective, but maybe they would be willing to share with you how where they're getting their information and how they're understanding a situation. It might just take a little bit longer, but practice being able to ask permission. One of my favorite things is to just ask, how are we doing? How are you doing? And really take time to listen to people. I use what we call an appreciative inquiry approach. And so if you're new to this channel, if you're new to hearing anything about me, if this is the first time you've started getting information from both in partners and learning how important it is to let go or be dragged, I use an appreciative inquiry approach. And that appreciative inquiry approach I used based on my experience in working with the recovery communities and other communities of color, basically being an ally for any groups that have felt and have been marginalized. And so, what I find with this work is that so often we go into conversations talking about the pros and the cons. We go into situations being trained to talk about what is good and what is bad. Are you on my side? Are you not on my side? So it's very much a binary. From an appreciative approach, I like to encourage people to think about how we can break apart the binary and actually first acknowledge the things that are true. So this is similar to acknowledging the divide, right? So things may not, we may be getting different information. That is true. And then talk about what is good and possible. And oftentimes things that are good is like, okay, we're here. We've all shown up. We're trying to have this conversation. We've started the dialogue. You've given me a moment to like actually share my story, something along those lines. And then possible, oftentimes that is just asking a different question. Like, I wonder what could make a difference. Just trying to stretch into, instead of asking the question, well, I wonder what's really getting in the way, or, we need to like do more to figure out what the problem is. It is a different take to say, why don't we take time to figure out, well, what could actually help us here? Is there anything that would be the beginning of starting to see a place of healing? And so when we think about using this approach, there's also something that's really important here, which is to remember that two things can be true at the same time. So normally I would share with you a little image. And so one of them is looking at a symbol. So there is a symbol that many of us might know. And for some people, if you look at one direction, it looks like a six. If you look at the other direction, it looks like a nine, right? And so two things are true. Like there's a symbol, and from one perspective, this is what your interpretation could be. And from another perspective, that is another interpretation. The other part of this is that depending on where you are and what your experience is, you're going to interpret the same like thing differently. And so, I was mentioning just a little while ago, right, about sugar. Um, Two things are true at the same time. Like sugar is for some of us like tastes really good. And if you have too much of it, can be really bad for you. So those things could be, can exist. It's not like one or the other, that it's like all evil or all one thing. And we need to be able to find ways to hold that two things can be true at the same time. That would then lead us to the next box over here, which is talking about courage. And so this whole dialogue sheet, this tip sheet, is about having courageous dialogue. And based on a quote from Brene Brown, it's important to remember that courage is being able to speak your mind and tell in your heart. Like when we are in a conversation that is emotional, it's important that you're able to name that it's emotional. That would be talking about what's true. Like, I have a lot of feelings about this, or I'm very passionate about this. Um, and not necessarily going into conversations thinking that you need to be neutral all the time. I think actually people have more respect for you and for the what you're sharing when you can be honest and courageous about where you're coming from. So being able to tell your story and why this is important to you is it takes courage, but it's also the way that it will become infectious for other people to be courageous as well. And then from that place of being courageous, oftentimes that can spark people being curious. So my favorite thing to talk about in when I do workshops is to acknowledge that I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee in the South. And we're always fixing to do something. And what I recognize from that is that sometimes we need to stop fixing. Okay. We need to, in that case, we actually need to think about getting into action oftentimes. But the other piece is that we need to actually be willing to pause, right? And just listen. So, as learning how to ask questions, to be curious. For example, can you tell me more of what you meant? So if you're in a conversation with someone and they're sharing something that seems really difficult, you might be able to say like, you know, this sounds really difficult, and I'm wondering like, how did you get through it? Like it's just a way to stay curious, not fix, not come in as someone else is telling their story and one up them with a story that's equally or worse. So this is a way of avoiding the oppression Olympics. And then another way, if you are struggling with like how to, let's say that someone is giving you permission and now you're going to take courage and you're going to share your story, you can share your story in three parts. And the way that we like to encourage people to practice this is to start off by saying, at first I thought. Okay. So maybe that could be, at first I thought everyone was divided and that, we were how, and I just couldn't understand how other people couldn't understand this perspective because, we all live on the same planet and, there's just so much division. And then I learned based on some of the things that I've been sharing here, that actually you're getting different information than I'm getting. And that the way that the algorithms work in our social media, you might be getting stories that are very different than what I'm getting. And so now, and I can share this as part of this, you add that next part. And now I am actively searching and taking intentional effort to go learn about things that might not be coming naturally into my social media feed, that I intentionally do the work to try and search for things and get outside of my bubble. Um, and you could use this for all kinds of different ways. I've had people share with me, at first I thought it was healthy to eat, a low carb diet, right? And then I learned that, well, actually, you need to have a whole range of things in your diet. And now I'm actually exploring what a ketogenic diet might be. Okay, just as actually part of what I'm learning right now. So you can use this to tell three parts of your story. One of the ways that I like to think about this is that maybe you were where they were at one point, right? So maybe your story can talk about at first, I really saw things the same way you did. And then I took some time to um, get educated about this and read this particular book or went and listened to this blog or read this blog or went and listened to this podcast or whatever you might say related to that, and now I realize that there are different ways to think about this, and I'm trying to be more open and courageous about what I'm engaging. So I hope this has been helpful to just unpack this tip sheet. It might not have been as clear from just, reading the different boxes here. And I hope that you find this material somewhat inspiring so that you can continue to be courageous and engage in dialogue. If you're interested in actually practicing some of these things, we do an event called the dinners. And we have opportunities where we support communities to do more dinner events. And it's really the best part about the dinners is that it's not a training. It's really people coming together that will be engaged in a facilitated dialogue with someone leading a group. There's like other people who are showing up are there because they're looking to connect and find ways to be curious together. And it's a great way to just come together if you have a team or a board or a coalition. reach out to us. I'm happy to help you shape an event that will encourage people to be courageous and actually have dialogue. And this is one of the first resources that we would want to share with anybody who attended that. So if you made it to the end of this video, thank you. Please like, please share, please add a comment. And I look forward to reading and responding to those comments so that we can continue to support more healing in our world.